We have equated having things with being, so that those who have things are considered more human beings. They are not arrested, they are not harassed because they have things. They have Lamborghinis, they have Porsche Cayennes, they have big houses. So every single person now wants to have things. And the best way to get things is either you get miracle money in church, you go to the occult, or you steal. Natif. So what we have done is created an industry of co-conspirators, right from the top of government, the top of mosque and church, to the bottom of society. Those who are deemed as the role models, those that are deemed as the philanthropists, are in essence criminals who masquerade in our society.
So guys, Brian Kagoro, he's a brilliant Pan-Africanist Zimbabwean. He's a constitutional and economical lawyer. And as I said, he's a Pan-Africanist, so he's for his African brothers and sisters. And in this speech, he gave a brilliant speech that you must hear. I can't describe it for you, so you got to listen to the entire thing and then grasp it, digest it, think about it, and then let me know what you think about it in the comment section. But it's a brilliant speech about corruption, education, and why the older heads are damaging the African continent, and we need the younger people, stuff like that. So take a listen and let me know what you think about it in the comment section. As always, I don't know, tell a friend and if you get a chance, like, comment, share, subscribe. Boom, let's get it.
What we heard from yesterday is we are sending soldiers and police officers to solve deep structural crises in African economies and intractable political culture problem of penicillinization of the state, of governance, and capture of institutions. By the time we ask soldiers, intelligence and police officers to go in, the political class, the administrative class, and the economic class would have cannibalized the potential of the country to develop equitably, inclusively, and in ways that bring the bottom and the top to share in the wealth of the country. I wish to suggest to you the reason why we have intractable conflicts on the continent and why governance reforms are important is not simply because governance in and of itself enables the exercise of political, economic, and socio-cultural power to be constrained, that it gives us the guardrails that determine the parameters of power, the duration of power, and also the purpose of power. It would seem to me whether you are talking about distribution and redistribution in the economy, or you are talking about executive discretion, or you are talking about respect of human beings and dignity, the fundamental points that the continent faces is we cannot have them solved except by their primary agents. So I want in this narrative and conversation we're going to have to suggest three things. As Africans, please do not only use root causes, because I can see a good number of you grew up either in villages or close to villages. And you know this, that crops don't only fail because the root causes. They also fail because of climatic causes, which are the neighborhood issues. They also fail because of pests and locusts, which are the external exogenous factors. Governance reforms in Africa remain incomplete unless we reform the global ecosystem of governance that's framed through contradiction, through double standards, and through exploitative mindsets where the rest can deploy their superiority in technology, in security, and other forms in order to predate or to act as predators against Africans. Of course, I think young people will say, why would you blame other people for your own stupidity? And I think which brings me to the second thing. We are selling air. And this will bring me to the government. We've been telling young people, go to school, get educated, then you'll get a good job, you'll be empowered. But in most of our countries, the people who are living the best lives have no education. The people who are driving the best cars, no education. And Charles Onyango Obo says they are succeeding because of corruption, not in spite of corruption. We've built a culture where we are telling everybody else to comply with governance processes and the instrumental and intrinsic value of governance institutions. And yet those who break the law, either because they are so high up in government, they're untouchable. So high up in the military, they're untouchable. So high up in the police, they're untouchable. They, their children, their cronies, their girlfriends, and their cats seem to live with impunity. And the only people who live subjected to the reformed governance systems and laws are poor people who will never break through the glass ceiling of deified, sanctified, and elevated fiefdom. I want to suggest to you that the reason why governance reforms, which traditionally have followed three trajectories: social concern of governance, which is address the livelihood issues; economic concerns of governance, which is make your governance friendly to the market, or so that markets are able to operate; and political concerns of governance, which is about ensure that power can be conquered, retained, and exercised either responsibly or to the exclusive beneficiary of those that are doing the reform. Those three have brought us into a point of both possibility and contradiction. And let me go to what sort of reforms we're talking about. No single problem that any of the African countries are facing stands in and of itself and on its own. Whether you are dealing with the abuse of young girls and early child marriage, or you are dealing with something such as narcotics trade, or dealing with cyber crime, or you are dealing with something as bad as fraud within banks, or you are dealing with abuse of authority, everything is interrelated to critical factors: levels of poverty, levels of inequality, levels of exclusion. And my brother Gatete yesterday was educating me, saying levels of education and literacy as well. So it would seem to me, if you take the spectrum of intersections of things, it is no longer possible to take a technicist approach to governance reforms, where you are simply saying, if we fix court procedure, we will have justice. Because if the judges are corrupt, fixing court procedures does not deliver justice. So we have to reform courts dealing with ethics and professionalisms, at the same time reforming penal courts that deal with questions of when and how you exact punishment. Now, there is another interesting thing about intersections. Very few things happening domestically or locally remain unrelated to things happening regionally and globally. Technology has dramatized this. You now can hijack a whole country, undermine a whole country, spread misinformation and disinformation in a whole country. So even if we manage to constrain the number of local citizens who are engaged in misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech, those who sit outside our borders, we engage in the same things, somehow they permeate and go across, because the digital platform enables them to access our citizens, as long as they have access to technology. Now, there are opportunities as well. Some of the things we could deny and hide before, as governments, as the police, as militaries, now today, that information can be spread and accessed, because people now have access to information from many more sources other than the government spokesperson, the police spokesperson, and etc. Now, there is danger of disinformation and misinformation, but there is power of alternative information. Regulation and reform in the context we live in is no longer a simplistic matter. It is a complex matter that requires that our institutions have capacities and competencies that go beyond constraint of dissent, repression of dissent, facilitation of exercise of rights, to a holistic understanding of security. And I shared with them the joke yesterday, Madam Chair, that as we seek transparency, we must remember what a neighbor of this country said: transparency is not nakedness. So there must be a measure in which you become transparent but discreet. There must be a measure in which, when you don't reform to function for now, you reform to function for the future. Now, let me try and land on what that might look like. Our court system, our judicial system, our legal system is still 30 years behind where technology has gone, even when it uses digital platforms. Our policing system, crime detection system, crime investigation system, and I know that we have forensic units that have been set. If you just look at how many forensic experts we have to deal with unresolved crimes in any country, we are still another 20 to 30 years behind where modern crime is. Right. It could be more. What I'm suggesting, Madam Chair, is the imperative of reform that faces us is it is no longer an afterthought to be thinking, what do we do with those organs of state that enable us to prevent crime, to secure or guarantee security? Because security has another dimension. Those that have satellites that hover above us are able to monitor every angle and aspect of our lives, and we cannot do it by deploying more human beings, as important as more police officers are. So the type of police officers, the type of military officers, the type of lawyers and judges, the type of scientists, physical scientists, and etc. we need is totally different. The strategy for national projection going forward, for continental projection going forward, essentially means that people who come to conferences talking like myself should have a lot less premium than people who can actually fix a thing. Like, we need these satellites that can monitor poaching. We need this that can do this. The investments we are making today in governance reforms should have a 50-year lifespan. If we're investing to deal with historical problems and current problems without projecting forward, we're not doing enough. It would seem to me that, therefore, there is something that we're still struggling with. Reforms that ensure centrality of women's rights and protection. So when I talk to police in Rwanda and elsewhere, I know one of the problems is how do we deal with social problems that become policing problems? Negative cultural attitudes. How do you reform an institution so that you change negative cultural attitudes, right? How do you deal with the fact that in some of our countries, we've governed the people so badly that citizens are by nature bandits and hostile to the state, even the things that the state does that is good for them. The biggest battle in institutional reform, Madam Chair, is not how beautiful and how well we do it. We can get the most efficient institutions, technically competent, as long as there's no buy-in from people who will be beneficiaries of those governance reforms. They become nice white elephants sitting in glossy documents that we can recount in conferences. Normative frameworks do not cure the pain and the hole in the heart of people who feel excluded, who feel undermined, whose dignity is every day confronted by the fact that raw sewer flows outside their homes, that they have no decent shelter. So we're trying to use governance reforms to cure political problems, to cure economic structural problems. Politics has been the #1 challenge, but politics' potential is we cannot review, reform, transform governance on the continent until we transform who becomes a leader. Can I repeat that? Leadership is central to the performance of institutions, but ideas are central to the performance of leadership. This thing we have done before, where political loyalty is given higher premium than the capacity to think clearly and to ideate and see the future. Somehow we have to find a middle point. Across the continent, we have political cadres now occupying significant positions in government because they are loyal. Some of them are fantastically incompetent, but they are wonderful people. Unfortunately, wonderfulness does not cure the underdevelopment challenge or the ability of external forces to hijack our governance. Lastly, greed. We can reform the court system. We can reform the immigration system. We can reform the economic system. But there is something about what it is that we have made important in our society. Jean-Paul Sartre says it is this: we have equated having things with being, so that those who have things are considered more human beings. They are not arrested, they are not harassed because they have things. They have Lamborghinis, they have Porsche Cayennes, they have big houses. So every single person now wants to have things. And the best way to get things is either you get miracle money in church, you go to the occult, or you steal. Natif. So what we have done is created an industry of co-conspirators, right from the top of government, the top of mosque and church, to the bottom of society. Those who are deemed as the role models, those that are deemed as the philanthropists, are in essence criminals who masquerade in our society. Now, what is governance reforms? Governance reforms assumes that society's consciousness is not tainted by greed, by flimsy concerns. That society's consciousness understands the essence of humanity. But governance reforms sometimes assume that what we are solving is a domestic problem of inefficiency, of weak ethics, and inability to maximize and optimize our operational competencies. However, and this is the thing that I came here to say to you, modern day governance reforms must accept others have designs on our countries. You can say, no, my country is small, or my country is peaceful. My country does not fight with anyone. They don't care as long as you have what they need. They are going to come and try and corrupt your politicians, corrupt your citizens. If they can't corrupt them, cause them to rebel against you. If they can't cause them to rebel against you, just cause some discontent. Therefore, governance reforms are about national defense, continental defense, and Pan-Africanism. How to make regional developmentalism work. The greatest enemy to governance reforms is sadly not an external imperialist. It's a local person who holds either an office or has access to control of public opinion, who has no political consciousness about national interests, continental interests, and the imperative of Africa developing on our own terms. We are betrayed by indifference and ignorance, but governance on this continent has been mutilated by those who want short-term gains without process. So governance reforms, Madam Chair, is not just about institutions and leadership, it's about citizenship. You can get leaders who want things to work. You can get institutions that can get things to work. But sometimes, citizens do not always act in their best interests. The gulf that happens between the popular mass and leadership. There was a book written by Nathan Shamiarira about Samora Machel. And in the book, in the introduction, Nathan Shamiarira said Samora was a great Mozambican revolutionary. He wanted to take Mozambique to the peak of the mountain. Sadly, at the point of his untimely death, Samora had reached the peak of the mountain and Mozambique was still in the valley. Now, my friends, we can even name the institutions, whether they're continental, they're national, until we carry the African citizenry, until we carry the people. We can't carry the people if they think we are tyrants. We can't carry the people if they think our primary job is to abuse their rights. But even when we don't abuse their rights, we cannot assume that consciousness grows naturally like weeds. We have to have a program of educating our people that says you can be responsible, not dependent intellectually on outside help. You can be responsible, not always dependent financially on outside help. You can be responsible, you can build the solutions you want. This is why homegrown solutions are the most fundamental component of governance reforms. Because to get me to adjust to a French version institution or American version institutions may take long. Lastly, the middle class is the worst enemy of governance reforms. The middle class owes a responsibility because it has knowledge, it has resources, it has many things, to act as a litmus test against how well our institutions are performing. But most instances when our institutions are beginning to fail, the middle class takes an escapist attitude. The middle class, electricity is not being provided. We buy generators and solar power. We don't even hold to account those who collect taxes to make sure we have electricity. When security is not working, we hire private security firms. We are no longer interested in the police. Everything that the middle class does is to delegitimize the state when we are legitimating our comforts. The fact that we have lost faith in the state is what enables the big gulf between the top, the middle, and the bottom. Governance reforms are about ecosystems of local, national, and global coherence in the exercise of power, distribution of opportunities, distribution of resources, and also functional outcomes that are equitably beneficial to all. Thank you.